Welcome to this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have with us Eric Robinson, retired 24-year FBI special agent and former Baptist pastor. So we'll learn from him about his unique career spanning ministries, SWAT operations, counterterrorism, and crimes against children. And we'll discuss what it truly takes to be an effective agent, the human stories behind the headlines, and how his background in faith and human intelligence provided an unexpected edge in law enforcement. Welcome to the show, Eric.
Thank you very much, AJ. I've been listening to some of your podcasts and you have some interesting content, so I'm glad to be here.
You are welcome. Welcome to the show, Eric. Welcome to India in this online form. And I'm sure not just in India, but a lot of people across the globe will benefit from what we are going to talk right now. We'll be talking about faith, we'll talk about service, and we'll talk about the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation. So we'll talk about all this, but before that, let's talk a bit about your journey, your background, your story, so that people know, audience knows better who they are listening to.
Certainly. I spent about the first 12 years of my adult life in Christian ministry, and that culminated in pastoring a Baptist church in Western New York. There came a point where I endured headaches every day for approximately 2 years until I came to a point where I told my wife, I need to find something that has less stress. So I applied for two jobs. One I was overqualified for, one I was underqualified for, and I got hired by the FBI. And remarkably, the day that I was accepted into the FBI, my headache stopped. It seemed like good confirmation that it was a good choice. So then I spent the next 24 years working a number of different violations in the FBI, from gangs, drugs, organized crime, crimes against children, national security, just about everything the Bureau covers. I had a chance to experience a lot of interesting people, got to do some things that I never expected I'd be able to do. And then at some point, my wife, when I was nearing retirement, she owns a company that publishes and markets books. She said, you should write a book. And I said, that sounds great, but I never wrote down all those anecdotes and stories. But in sitting down and trying to put together a memoir, I realized the stories just came out. So I had written a book. It'll be published in the fall, and it encompasses my transition from being a pastor to working in the FBI and law enforcement.
Absolutely, Eric. We'll certainly talk about your book too. But first, let's learn a bit from you about life, about working, about doing, things related to as a pastor. What is it that you learned maximum from? Did you learn more from your life as a pastor, or did you learn more about life as an FBI agent?
That's a good question. I've never been asked that. I think I've learned more as an FBI agent. I worked with some of the same people in a sense. The church that I pastored was meant to reach out to people who didn't normally go to church. We weren't looking for folks who'd grown up in the church. We were reaching out to, in many ways, the outcasts, people who didn't feel like they fit in a traditional church. And then working with the FBI, though the element was more criminal, we're working with families. As we would arrest someone, we're encountering grandmothers, sisters, family members who are now affected by this search warrant, this arrest. So there was, in a sense, a significant overlap in the two groups of people. But learning more from the FBI, one, I had more time doing that. But secondly, it was a unique opportunity to apply some of the lessons learned from ministry of showing grace and patience with people in a very difficult situation. If we come and arrest someone's son, that is now that day the worst day of their life. And so having to work with those people to calm them down and set them in a good position to handle what's going on was something I had, I think, picked up a bit from ministry and was able to carry over in dealing with people in law enforcement.
Absolutely. When you interviewed for the FBI, uh, did they ask you any questions about your pastor thing? Means were they intrigued? They must be wanting to understand more about your transition.
Well, there's a normative process for getting in the FBI, and part of that is sitting before a panel of agents where they're going to ask questions about tell a time where you encountered a significant tragedy and had to overcome it. What were the results? A time that you had to deal with difficult circumstances, whatever it might be. So, in that interview process, of course, many of the stories I told were from interacting with people. I believe that that may have played a part in being able to be hired because at least those agents interviewing me, I would assume, realize that much of what we do, aside from just investigations, is being able to interact with people well and win them over to our sides.
Absolutely. In your career with the FBI, long career, 24 years, did you ever feel that, for any of the operations or work, they would think, he's much more of a man of God and not belittling you in any way, but just in a fun sort of a way. I just want to understand from, as an outside, about the inside working of FBI.
From my experience, the majority of FBI agents treat people well. And there's been many times that that's been remarked on. I even had one father thank me for executing a search warrant at his house because he was unable to control his son and he was afraid his son was going to kill people. So we treat people professionally, though many can be angry and I've been yelled at and spit at. For the most part, when we encounter folks, if they've had any interaction with police before, they've often commented that they at least appreciate the professionalism that we show.
Absolutely. Anything that that surprised you, from transitioning from ministry to the FBI, from that work to this particular new sort of thing?
Well, in some ways, I believe that I was doing God's work, obviously, in ministry and bringing about justice for people who need it seemed like that was also doing God's work. So I felt comfortable in that. I was honestly surprised how well I took on the role, and it felt comfortable to me to be part of law enforcement. I had shot a gun maybe once prior and was then learning in the FBI Academy and then became more proficient through training. Looking back, it's remarkable to me that I can still feel like that part of spirituality is with me, but I identified so much, I believe, more as an FBI agent. It became more of who I was, and I enjoyed the people I was with. I was surprised at the high quality people that are hired in the FBI across the board. Many, many good people.
Absolutely, absolutely. Doing God's work and then dealing with the Godfathers.
Yeah,
Was there any time when you felt that it was a wrong move, right move? It can be a lot of dangerous work at a lot of time.
it can be. If ever there was an occasion, and this would happen, where I'm investigating someone and it turns out either that they seem like they're not guilty or I still think they are guilty, but I know we won't be able to prove the case, then we've got plenty of other bad guys to look at. Would just move on from there. But for the most part, when doing an investigation, it's pretty well determined. We are looking at the right people to arrest, to take off the streets, and to help out victims along the way.
Absolutely, Eric. So, what does it take to be a good FBI agent?
It takes patience. It takes in order to be a good FBI agent, you have to know how to develop a case and work an investigation, but it also involves dealing with people. So many times along the way, whether it's developing informants, winning witnesses over and calming them, I felt like much of the grace that I had to show people in ministry also carried over in just bringing people to our side and working with me. There were many times where I would have to carry out an interrogation of a subject. So post arrest, they're sitting down. This is someone who has already stated on social media that they hate police. And now I've got to try to win an audience and even get them to talk, hopefully make some confessions. And the ability to communicate is a great necessity. The ability to think on your feet and be able to respond well to how a subject or potential informant or witness might respond. That the communication is probably the most important. There's much work that's done behind the scenes at the desk, through subpoenas, through combing through records, but ultimately we have to then confront people. And if we want to win over those who are going to help us, communication is most effective.
Absolutely. Now, not everyone is a pastor and then moves on to FBI.
No, I'd
I
never met.
don't know if there was any other case you met during your 24 years.
Nope, I had never met. There were people who had left to go to ministry, and there are people obviously involved in their churches. I'd never met another pastor, and so when I was in the academy, I got the nickname preacher, and that stuck for a while. And I would often tell people I went from preacher to breacher, where I would break in doors.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, you talk about that you had that experience from your background in faith and human intelligence, and that in a way provided some unexpected edge in law enforcement. Help us understand that part so that people who are in other line but are using those same skills in other when they're transitioning to another work, they will find some sort of resemblance, understanding, better understanding.
Well, I think that it's almost a fact that if you take communication that you see played out in movies and television where cop comes in and slams a table or yells at somebody, if you take that and do the opposite, that's likely going to be effective. So even when interviewing someone and they're telling me lies and I know they're lying, I don't want to stop them immediately on what they're saying, because I want to be curious and I want to dig in more to why are they saying these things? What's their motivation? What more might they reveal? So the typical character that you see in law enforcement where there's a bully in the room and you're forcing your will upon them, I've found that if we put handcuffs on someone or we break down their door or we're pointing guns at them in their bed, we've already shown an ultimate display of force. I don't need to yell on top of that to let them know that I'm in charge. And so from that point, now I'm trying to connect with them and bring them back to more of a real life situation where, just like you and I are having, it's a conversation. And as I share with you information that I have, you're starting to feel more comfortable about what your situation is and what you are facing. And with that, you might speak more with me and we can go back and forth. And before you know it, though it is manipulative, I am getting you to tell me things you otherwise wouldn't want to be telling me. So I think how that applies to everyday people is having the curiosity. When someone says something that you don't like, you don't agree with, rather than defending and opposing, being open to why they're saying those things. And for me, that would often bring out more evidence that I need. I think for people in daily life, that's going to give them the understanding of another person's character and their intents too.
Absolutely, Eric. You said, if I heard you correctly, that in your earlier job, work, prior to FBI, there was quite a bit of stress.
It,
And
it was for me. So I know that there's thousands of people who work in ministry who are able to deal with people and their problems and not internalize it. I'm not a more empathetic person than others necessarily, but there were people that we dealt with that we were trying to reach out to people who are having difficult lives. And in doing so, we brought in people who had difficult lives. So we would have people who are drug addicts, unwed mothers, people going through difficulties in their family. And I took that on too much and I couldn't figure out how to let go of it. So that continued the stress for me. In the FBI, there's plenty of stress that goes on, but if I have a case where I have 6 people that I think should be indicted and sent to prison, but the prosecutor says no, we're going to only indict 4, I'm upset, but it doesn't matter to me. Eventually, those people will get caught. Something will happen to them. God will bring justice, whatever it might be. It didn't matter as much to me as when somebody in my congregation would say, "Oh, I think my wife might be leaving me, and my son has a drug habit, and I can't pay the bills." That was much more difficult for me to then just release.
absolutely, Eric, I understand. In FBI, what was the stress level? I thought it's a huge lot of cases, lots of stress there also. I know that friction brought in some relief for you because some decisions are not in your hand, and that obviously helps you, come. But I want to understand it from your understanding.
Well, it's a different stress. So when I spent 15 years as a SWAT operator, which meant going to doors and hitting them with a ram where I had no cover and could easily be shot through the door. And so that heightens obviously stress in one sense, but once that's done, I'm done. We've encountered people with guns. I had one young man rush us with a baseball bat who um, was shouting that we should kill him. So there are incidents like that that have stress, but then I could go home and it was gone. It wasn't something that I worried about beyond that. Interestingly, the situation where we had the young man rush us with a baseball bat, I was wearing my Garmin watch and I went back to look at my heart rate and I could point out exactly when that incident happened because I had the normal heart rate and then it spiked to, I think it was like 170 for like 1 minute. So yes, stress there, but then it came right back down. It wasn't something that I was carrying on day after day.
Absolutely, absolutely, Eric. In terms of, you have recently retired, but when
Yes.
you were in the FBI, was there the stress of any political interference or any sort of outside pressure for one particular case, several political cases, you know, uh, or maybe it was only for the FBI director and deputy director?
That's a fair question. For us in the field, there's very little that trickles down. There may be an emphasis that comes from the Department of Justice to say we should start working these cases more, and so we're looking for them. But agents in the field are just trying to do their job to work righteous cases where people are breaking the law. So for the most part, an informant will bring us information. It might be a headline, it might be a tip that comes in to our threat center. And if that is valid, then we work that. So there are definitely cases where field offices get pressure that comes from headquarters, that comes from DC. We were fortunate enough to not experience that. And it's my belief that for the most part, nobody really wants that. We did go through a period where we were doing a lot of investigations on rioters from January 6th at the Capitol. And so agents worked those cases. And I never met anyone who was excited about it, but they worked them and got the charges that they needed. And then when all the violators were pardoned, everyone just shrugged and went moving on to the next.
Absolutely, Eric. You recently retired from FBI. Would you look at FBI the same way when you looked at it when you were inside?
Well, I, there's a saying that any club that allows you to enter, you suddenly have a lower opinion of. And so I always imagine the FBI is an amazing place where people do just unbelievable things. And then I get brought in and I start thinking, oh, okay, no, actually these are normal people. I think they're higher quality than most, but uh, what we did was what smart, dedicated people would do. So getting involved in the FBI, it helps to understand and bring the humanity into it. We would get calls, I would take complaint calls where someone would ask, hey, can you get on your computer and find out this? Because people have an opinion that the FBI has some supercomputer that has all the knowledge in it. Uh, but then you start to understand it's just legwork. It's sending out subpoenas to banks. It's interviewing people. So there's nothing tremendously special. We don't have different abilities than other police forces. It's just good people doing that work. So, yeah, getting into the FBI, I learned a bit that just like me, they're normal human beings. I make mistakes. Other people made mistakes, and we just overcome them.
Absolutely, Eric. Now, being an agent, you know a bit more than the general public would do.
Sure.
And so, when you are after retirement, when you can look at things much more the way as you want to look at, as Eric Robinson, not only as a FBI agent, but with that knowledge, how would you like to see the political system operating or impacting your former workplace?
I would like to see the FBI continue to be an independent organization that utilizes knowledgeable agents and support staff doing what they believe individually with oversight from management in each office to carry out the investigations they think are best and are most beneficial to their area of responsibility. Anytime that headquarters got involved with cases for us, no one really cared for that. No one liked that. We still did our jobs, but I think the FBI works best when individual agents who are well qualified to make decisions are allowed to make their decisions with oversight that's within one or two levels above them.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Eric. So now let's move on to your memoir. So,
Okay.
as you said, it's coming out in the fall. The idea you talked about your wife told you about about this thing. Why not think about this particular book? But writing a book as a pastor, as an FBI agent, I don't think you ever had writing a book ever in your mind. Suddenly, when you get this idea, that from your wife, how did you then move around that? Means it's a different matter. An idea can be good, but writing is a very difficult work.
Well, my wife works with many authors and she gave me a book and she said, "Here, read this. This is from a client of mine and it's how to write books." And in the book they say, well, there's two ways that people often write books. One is they plot it out, make sure they have the structure down and then fill in the gaps. And other people just sit down by the seat of their pants and write. And I know myself and I know I'm more of the seat of the pants type of person. And so I thought, well, let me sit down and start to map out what I want to say. And as I sat down at the computer, I thought, well, let me just start with like maybe an introduction. And then it just started going. And it was remarkable to me. I was disappointed that I hadn't written down notes. I remember thinking my early years in the bureau, I should write things down so I remember how things happened and interesting stories. But as I sat down, it it flowed out. And that's a natural situation for FBI agents. So many times we'll be waiting for an informant to show up for a drug buy, or there's downtime after a search warrant, or we're sitting in our armored vehicles waiting for something to happen, and people start telling stories. And they tell stories that everyone laughs at and chuckles. But as I step away from that, I would think that's actually pretty amazing. So we would take it as common of things that would go on, the being involved in the underworld of the society that we work in. And I think as an agent, I just took that for granted, that I know that that store over there, they hide drugs in it for these gang members, whereas everybody else just goes to the store. And there's those instances where working in this world, you got to see things that are different than they're the same that you would see, but then we got to know more about what's actually going on. So those stories started coming out. Many of them are, uh, I think, funny. Uh, the working title that I have for my book is Irreverend, which would be a play on reverend and also irreverent, because much of what I got to do was a little outside of what a pastor normally would see. So I had a take on that.
Absolutely. So, who is this book for? Your memoir for Eric?
I would think the book is for those who are interested in law enforcement, but also just having an insight into the human nature of what the FBI does. There aren't real peeks into special things that the FBI can do, but I do believe that it shows the humanity of what agents go through. Uh, Getting insight into the world of teenage prostitution and the pimps who manipulate them. I think those are types of things that people might be fascinated by. Time on the SWAT team of some of the barricaded subjects that we dealt with in dangerous situations, working human intelligence with informants, and the kind of it would strike me that I would meet with an informant sitting at a restaurant, and he would be giving me information that I would later be classifying as top secret national security information. But there would be like a women's group sitting at the booth behind us, and they could probably overhear some of this too. And they're unaware that here's a gentleman who's telling me about details going on in his home government as he speaks with people back in his homeland on WhatsApp and finding out troop movements by Russian forces or whatever it might be. Those are things that I think people might find interesting. It might give them a second to pause when they're sitting in a Panera Bread company and looking around and wondering if there's anybody here talking about government matters.
Absolutely, Eric. You talk about using humor in your FBI job. How did you reflect that part of humor into your book?
Uh, well, I like to joke around a lot, and probably a bit too much. So I introduce it. There are many things that I bring out that are, I think, fascinating stories because they are unique to the experience of an FBI agent, but also the storytelling that I bring, I believe, captures some of the humor in it. So we one of the stories I love to tell was of a pimp that we had imprisoned, and I was listening to his jail calls. So I worked up a case on him further of him selling oxycodone and other pharmacological tablets through his uncle. So I worked up a case on him further, his uncle, his mother, his girlfriend, all along the way. And as we went to arrest the family members and the friends, I said, well, I want to interview his girlfriend because I'd been listening to their jail calls and I could hear how she was just further and further annoyed with him. So we went to the local sheriff's office. I asked, hey, we're going to go arrest this individual, and I'd like to know if we could have an interview room when we get back. And the sheriff's deputy said, that family's been in this office more than I have. There's no way she's going to talk to you. And I said, okay, well, we'll see. So we arrested her, brought her back for an interview, and she was immediately opposing us. And I had taken about a half dozen clips from jail calls and recorded them, and I played them for her. And it was her boyfriend, the pimp, talking to a woman. And I said, can you help identify this woman for me? And I played it, and the pimp was talking about how much he loved this girl, and she said, well, that's not me. And I said, okay, well, let me play another one. We played another one, and it was him talking all these loving things to another woman. And she said, that's not me. And I said, I'm sorry. Let me play another one. And I kept going with her boyfriend speaking how much she was in love with a dozen other women. And I didn't even have to read her rights. I didn't even have to question her about her criminal culpability. She immediately just said, I'll tell you whatever you want to know. And she eventually told the prosecutor, I will testify against him on one condition, and that is I'm on the stand first. So normally we confront people and we tell them, you're cooked. We've got all this on you. You're going to go to jail for so long. And I didn't have to do that at all. All I had to do was show that there was no reason for her to continue being loyal to her boyfriend because he was not loyal to her. So I find that funny. That's one of my favorite stories.
Absolutely. So one thing that comes to my mind, Eric, is as a pastor, you will you believe in forgiving others. Let they be forgiven. That's what I understand.
Sure.
But as an FBI agent, your mindset becomes much more of that people must pay for their crimes. How do you now reconcile when you are neither a pastor nor an FBI agent? How do you reconcile between that? Who is Eric Robinson now?
Well, I'm only 2 weeks into retirement, so that's a tough one. Uh, I I am someone who I think is going to move on with an understanding of how both the church works and how law enforcement works. And I'm hoping that even when I was a pastor, when I was an FBI agent, my foremost desire was to just be a good person, treat my family well, treat my community well. So I've learned patience from work in the FBI. I have learned that from working with people in the church. And so what I've taken away from this is just a better view of society, how people are spiritually, also how people are in some ways criminally too. So we'll see. We'll see what the next phase of life brings about. But I think the experience that I've had helps me to understand my role better in how to make society better. I hope that that's true.
Absolutely, Eric. So, someone who has seen life from very close, with the type of experience that you had and still have, which not many will have in that sort of a way. In a nutshell, what would you like to share, as a message with people with your experience, learnings of life?
What I can share about what I've learned from life is for people to have open eyes to the world, to not take things on the surface. People behave in certain ways and we judge them, not knowing what's going on in their world. I learned that ministering to people as we sit down, you find out more about maybe the harm they've endured, which makes them the way that they are, the things that they feel like they need to be forgiven from. And then working in law enforcement, it's not just the people that are committing the crimes where you start to understand a little bit of why they do what they do, but then the families that are affected. And so I try to live my life. I'll always be judgmental, but I take that initial feeling of judgment and try to be open to what they might have had to endure. And until I find that out, until I have curiosity and patience to learn that, I try to set aside that judgment and just accept that people are doing the best that they can in life.
Absolutely, absolutely, Eric. Well explained, well said. There is so much to learn from you about life, about doing things the right way and doing things that works for everyone, and also to learn lots to learn from your book, upcoming book. What's the best way that people can connect with you?
Oh, golly. They can find me on LinkedIn at Eric Robinson. There'll be a picture of this face on it. And Instagram. I am developing a network so that I can promote the book. This is what my wife tells me to do, is she works in marketing. Her company is Weaving Influence, and that will be the publisher of the book. So when the time comes, I will be promoting that and amplifying this interview too, to let people know that the book is out, and here's how they can get it.
Wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.